Welcome to another episode of Never Again Is Now. I'm Phyllis Zimbler Miller, and today my co host Evelyn Marcus isn't with us due to a health issue with which she's dealing. While many of us enjoy the benefits of Amazon, below the surface, Amazon appears to be somewhat, if not more so, anti Semitic. Here to tell us about her personal experience and then a lot more is Samantha Edis. She is the creator of the Jews Letter, which I get, that provides good Jewish news. And she's also the producer of the documentary October 8th, which I've seen. I highly recommend. It will hit theaters on March 14th. Okay, let's start. Welcome, Samantha.
Thanks for having me.
So, first, this is not a very simple question. What is an employee resource group at Amazon?
So a lot of companies, starting with sort of the invention of DEI and the recognition that there are a lot of valuable things about having a diverse employee group. They started having affinity groups within corporations. So any big company typically has employee resource groups. They're called ERGs is their acronym, and they make it so that employees can find people like them. So it might be a women's employee group, or it might be an Asian employee group or an LGBTQ group. It's really trying to help people within a company feel like they are, they have peers and that they have a place to go for support.
So let's talk about Amazon now.
Sure. So I am often asked to talk to employee resource groups and hired by employee resource groups to give speeches. In my previous life, pre-October 7th, 2023, I was always talking about women's empowerment. And so a lot of my work was focused on talking to women's groups around the country, at conferences, at companies, all over, to inspire women to manage their professional and personal lives at the same time and show them that you could actually have a more fulfilling life if you stayed in the workforce and didn't feel like you had to choose between having a family and having a career. Then when October 7th hit, I sort of turned all of my attention to fighting anti-Semitism and fighting for Israel. And it was in that capacity that Amazon Jewish employees reached out to me to speak to them. Now, they also made it clear to me that unfortunately, their only organizational structure was an employee Slack channel because they had appealed many times to Amazon to give them an official employee resource group for Jewish people. And Amazon's response every time was Judaism is not an ethnicity, it's a religion, and we don't have employee resource groups based on religion. And when they would push back and say, well, actually, Judaism is an ethno religion, it fell on deaf ears. So as a result, they organized themselves in a Slack channel, which for those of you who don't know what a Slack channel is, it's basically almost like a WhatsApp or a text group chat internally. And it was for Jewish employees. So there were a few hundred people on there, and they shared with me that they had no budget. And so we agreed that I would do, I think it was like a half hour Zoom call for free to help the Jewish employees and feel better. And of course, I said yes right away. Then almost as soon as it was organized, I guess there was some sort of mole in the group who maybe was pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas, as I like to say, because they're one and the same these days. They complained to human resources and said that this person's controversial. And I guess what ended up happening is human resources poured through my Instagram. I'm very vocal on Instagram. They went back months and months and finally found like one thing that I posted that was supposed to be funny about, I don't know if you remember how all of these gays were for Gaza, and it was like gays
Yeah.
for Gaza and at a place that they would obviously not be toterated or comfortable or
Oh, well,
even
they would be killed.
Exactly. Thank you. So I posted about that. And then the HR group said that because I posted that, I was controversial and I was saying something bad about the gays, which clearly I wasn't. But that's what they used to sort of make me into this controversial speaker so that they wouldn't have to address it. Now, what ended up happening is the Jewish employees fought back. And as a result, the HR team said, okay, here's the only way we will allow Samantha Edis to speak. She can do a Zoom with you that's pre recorded, and we will vet it. And then if we accept the content, then we can publish it to the whole group. And so I agreed to do that. And we did it. There were a couple of Jewish employees on the call afterwards. They were like, there was certainly nothing controversial about this, and I think it's fine. And sure enough, HR said that the content was too controversial and it could not be posted to the group. Only a few months later, the rapper Macklemore was hired to speak at Amazon. He has notoriously said a number of anti-Semitic things, and he was not considered controversial. So I think the whole incident kind of shows you where Amazon stands on the Jews.
Just
Yeah.
to clarify, was he hired by an affinity group or by the overall
Yes,
corporate?
by an affinity group. It was the drug addiction affinity group or the former addiction affinity group. And I guess he is a former addict or something. So he was speaking to them.
Oh, okay. Just so we have the same placed in front of us.
Yeah.
And then let's move on. So obviously, this is unacceptable. Although how you fight back against it, and I don't mean you, it's plural, is boggles one's mind. And it goes back to erasing Jews. And it's just, I mean, I do a lot of research. I'm not an historian, not saying I'm on the Third Reich, especially the early years I'm working on now before the war. And erasing Jews is a very specific kind of mindset. And Amazon seems to be doing that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but now let's talk about the Amazon hostage.
So Sasha Trufanov, his formal name is Alexander Trufanov, was an Amazon engineer with their Annapurna group in Israel. And he, in his late 20s, he, was a really sweet guy and, was often taking care of his family and had a very serious girlfriend. And was very happy in his life as an Amazon engineer. He was visiting kibbutz near Oz and was taken hostage. And uh, since the moment he was taken hostage, Amazon did not say an official word about it. And the reason this is so significant, in addition to signaling to Amazon employees that they don't matter, right? Because especially the Jewish employees were horrified, and the only outlet they had to talk about their peer who was kidnapped was this Jewish Slack channel that we just talked about. But in addition to that, Amazon obviously is one of the most powerful companies in the world. They could exert pressure in any country, and they did not. And as evidence of that, every time I posted videos talking about Amazon's failure to acknowledge that they had a kidnapped employee that was kidnapped by Hamas, that was living in torturous conditions, every time I posted a video like that, his family wanted to collaborate on it. So they would ask me to add their names to it. So they would post it on their page as well, their Bring Sasha homepage. So clearly, they also had the same feeling about why isn't our company supporting us? And if you think about companies these days, right? If I personally just lost my home in the Palisades fire, if you suffer something like that, a loss like that, or you are sick or whatever it is, you expect and you would find that a company like Amazon would reach out to you. What can we do? How can we support you? How can we help? So the fact that one of their employees was taken hostage the same day his father was murdered on October 7th by Hamas, and you don't say a word, and you're Andy Jassy, the Jewish CEO, it is beyond unacceptable. And just unconscionable that you would not speak out on behalf of your employee. In fact, I saw that Keith Siegel, who was an American hostage
Yes.
who was there for almost 500 days, his employer apparently was very, very vocal on his behalf. In fact, I got a message when a lot of Amazon employees, since I was canceled, ironically, reach out to me with their stories all the time now of anti-Semitism at the company. But one of the things that was sent to me was at their huge annual conference. There was not one mention of Sasha Truvanov, and the only mention of him at all was they had a whiteboard where you could write any personal message, and someone had written about Sasha, and that was it.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room. What's Amazon afraid of?
Amazon is afraid of the enormous pro-Palestinian community who are their customers and their employees. And I think that what we have to realize in this country is that we are all fighting jihadists, whether you are pro-Israel or not. You are unfortunately in the jihadist target. If you are
Exactly.
not a Muslim, you are not a jihadist. They want nothing to do with you. They want to take down democracy. They don't want to just take down the Jews. And I think we've gotten to this point in America, especially where we're so politically correct that we can't speak out about something we see. And what we've learned, and one of the things you and I were talking about, I'm a producer of that movie October 8. And one of the great things about the film is it shows you is that this is a propaganda war that has been leveraged. I mean, Iran has been funding this war for more than 20 years. And so a lot of people will say, oh, Israel is terrible messaging. No, it's that Iran has been funding a propaganda war of false information and lies because they do not care about the truth. All they care about is jihadism and spreading it. So they are funding all of these pro-Palestinian campaigns on campuses across the country. They're funding pro-Palestinian journalists who've invaded newsrooms across the country. This is a war. This is what we're up against. And it's actually really important to note that we the one thing I would say that is very positive is that really not everyone is pro-Palestinian. It feels like it because that's their intention. Their intention is to do these very visible statements that are supporting the pro-Palestinian movement, which is essentially a jihadist movement. And they're doing it across the country in very visible ways, but it really is less than 10% of the population. This is not the norm.
I just want to explain to anyone who has a question about what jihadist means, and we could define it. The day after 9/11, the television was on, our little teeny black and white television, and I walked into the kitchen and I saw, I believe it was the number two person of Osama bin Laden's, number two person, and he said something to the effect of it, and we will take back Andalusia. Now, I happen to know what Andalusia is. Many Americans might not. It means Spain. In case anyone is curious, what a jihadist wants, total world caliphate. So let's make this very clear. So what's going now is a risk to everyone's freedom in a democratic and even in an undemocratic country.
Correct. And I think it's really about waking up. Like wake up America. Jihadism is coming for you next. And
Yes,
if you think you can just ignore it and stay silent, you can't. And unfortunately, what many people don't realize is that their silence is not taking sides. It's actually emboldening the
absolutely.
oppressor, which is the jihadists. So when you are silent, you embolden the pro-Palestinian movement. And the pro-Palestinian movement is not this sweet movement about people who want freedom. They do not want freedom. They want to
Especially for you, they don't want freedom.
correct. If you are interested in democracy, they are against you.
So I thought that the documentary, which I was lucky enough to get to see at an early screening because it's not hitting theaters till March 14th, was that it was not about what went on in Israel after October 7th, but what went on here and is continuing here and really points up what we're facing. Samantha, would you like to talk a little bit more about how you got involved and what you had hoped to achieve and is it working?
Yeah, I mean, since October 8th of 2023, I've personally tried to get involved in the most sort of high gain projects, the ones that I feel like can reach the most people. So most of my work is done on social media and trying to reach as many people as possible that way because I had a nice following before that happened. And so I use my existing platform because I also reach a lot of non-Jews, which is really important to me because I don't want us to be in an echo chamber. So what I've sort of taken on as a role is delivering the news. Like I deliver unfiltered, correct, accurate news, which unfortunately you can no longer find in our mainstream media outlets. One of the ways that I have found of delivering this message is a friend of mine who's a very well-known award-winning film director, Wendy Sachs. She approached me and asked me to be a producer on this film. I jumped at the chance, one, because I believe in her and know that she's constantly um, doing amazing things, and that if it was a hard project like this would be, she would find a way to get it done, which she did, and she had all the right voices in there. And the second was the topic. It was really uncovering why the horrific events of October 7th basically unleash a tsunami of anti-Semitism in across the world. And it obviously didn't just start on October 8th, although it woke us up to what was already bubbling under the surface. And again, it goes back. One of the things the movie is so effective in uncovering is going back to how far back this takes us, how far back Iran has been planning this propaganda war of literally brainwashing our college students, brainwashing our faculty, brainwashing lower education. It's terrifying. And I think that Wendy did an incredible job of really honing in on how this impacts our everyday and just how insidious this is and what we need to do to fight it.
And I think it's much more pervasive and I'm just going to give you a funny example of funny is in quotes. My daughter and I were in New York a couple of weeks ago. We saw the Pulitzer winning prize, English. It takes place in a classroom in Iran, and they're learning Farsi. And we were really upset. The play was so, isn't Iran wonderful? I'll get to it. That I am convinced, so this is just an example, can't prove it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be sued, but that there was money behind it and that the people latched on to giving a Pulitzer because isn't it wonderful? And so the Wall Street Journal, which has been my paper since I was a journalism student 1,000 years ago, I read the review came on afterwards and it praised the play, but said even though there was no mention of the oppressive or repressive regime, I think I got those. And I thought, yeah, because it's propaganda. Now,
Of
could I be
course.
wrong? Probably
I
not.
mean, it's insane. Look at women in Iran. If you don't care about Jews, care about women, care about it is insane. The lack of human rights, the child marriage. It's just a terrible, terrible country right now. Was it always terrible? No.
No.
But right now it is led by an oppressive, evil regime, and we cannot be afraid to say that. Look at the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times has blood on its hands. There was an article today in the Jerusalem Post about how biased their coverage has been in favor of Hamas. I mean, it is disgusting. And just 2 days ago, the one thing I can't quit, I can easily quit the New York Times because it's no longer journalism. It's literally propaganda. But the one thing I can't quit is the games because I like to do the spelling bee and I like to do the puzzle every day. But 2 days ago, I was doing the puzzle and they had one of the clues was Palestinian activist. And it mentioned a woman who I will not name here, who is, but you can go to my Twitter and find it, but she literally was in jail for saying that she wants to murder all the Jews. She's in jail for saying, she was in jail for saying that Hitler did nothing. Wait till you see what we're going to do. And this is a woman they're calling a Palestinian activist and putting in their crossword puzzle. Like, what has become of the world? And it's why are we respecting this as our paper of record still? Why isn't there a national uproar? And why are advertisers still advertising in that paper? I think we have to wonder, like, what is behind this and why is this acceptable? And I think, there are so many brainwashed people now, and there are also brainwashed Jews. And sometimes people feel that if a Jewish person is at the helm, then it must be okay. And we're now smart enough to know that that's just not true.
I will just mention my daughter had another shock that week in New York, which was at the Museum of Broadway. I won't go into the long story of how Jews are totally erased in that uh, museum. But when I reached out to a very, very highly paced producer, his answer to me in part was, well, there are Jews on the board. And all I could think of was, great. Have they even noticed that the Jews are totally erased?
It's disgusting. It's so sad. Yeah.
So we need to figure out in the few minutes we have remaining how we're going to galvanize our listeners to do something.
Well, I think it's so important for people to realize that you do not need to have some sort of big social media platform or a big listenership on a podcast to make a difference. So let's just take the two examples you gave me, right? Of the play and the museum, right? Writing letters to every member of the board, writing emails to the company, cold calling the reception and saying, I want to speak to the director of the museum and ask why Jews have been erased. Talking about the fact that this show is despicable and that there's something about it, and writing a review in your local paper or anything. These are the things we can do. You see something wrong at your kid's college or your grandchild's high school, you write about it. You write to the director of the school, or you write to your local congressperson. I mean, the one thing that people don't realize is that the political system in America, the way it works, whether Republican, Democrat, whatever it is, they track every single office, tracks every single communication that comes in, every email, every letter, every phone call. So those calls, they make a difference. And when you are calling to express your opinion, you feel like I'm just one person. What could I do? That one phone call truly makes a difference. That one email makes a difference. So speak out about any transgression, not just the big ones, the little ones too. It all makes a difference. So if you see that thing in the New York Times, comment on the write to the publisher of the New York Times, write to the advertisers. These things really do make a difference.
And it's something that you can do on your own without waiting. I'm trying to get a program in my synagogue to deal with something I will tell you, with the liberated ethnic studies curriculum in California, which is a subject that people think they've resolved and is absolutely not resolved. And I won't go out on a limb here, but it has to be, in many cases, it must be at the grassroots level because we need people on the ground. Look, we're not asking, for example, in this case, for people to then complain to the principal if their kids are in school because they might be worried that their kids will get a pushback. But then they go to another organization and they say, this is what's happening at my school. Can you do something? Not in my name. So there are ways to really be grassroots activists and still protect yourself if that's what you're worried about.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, with these final minutes, do you have something that you'd like more to share that you think is important that we've missed in this conversation?
Well, I do think that one of the things that I wake up and spend my day trying to decipher the real news, right? Because the old news, whether you used to listen to NPR, you used to read the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or whatever our traditional media outlets were, unfortunately, they have been tainted literally by bias, by pro-Palestinian bias. Their newsrooms have been invaded. They are not reputable sources. I mean, even yesterday, if you look at CNN's headlines, like they are blatantly anti-Israel headlines. And on top of it, they're peddling false information. So, I launched a Substack newsletter called The Jews Letter, which is like newsletter with a J, the Jews Letter, really to just give unfiltered, true information to people so that if they're not following me on social media, because every day on social media, I'm constantly posting very, very up to date, accurate news about the hostages or about anti Semitism on campus or about the fight for Israel. But that's my full time job is to decipher the news and deliver it in an unbiased way because there are so few news sources you can trust now. And so I want to turn myself into that trustworthy news source. But then the other thing I'm doing, because I think so much of our news as Jews is gloom and doom, is as you mentioned, Phyllis, every week I post 10 pieces of good Jewish news. It could be that, on campus there was something passed that fights anti-Semitism, or it could be that there's a Jewish NHL player, whatever it is, it's something to lift us up because I think so much of the time we are, trading really horrific news because there is so much bad going on in the world, but there's still a lot of good things too. And so I think it's important that we talk about the positives as well.
Oh, I absolutely think we need to talk about the positives. We need to
Yeah.
make young people proud to be Jews. And I will just say that I think I can say breaks my heart. I was trained as a journalist to be objective, and it drives me crazy. Even in my newspaper of record, the Wall Street Journal, I find the bias, and it just drives me crazy. But you have to be trained. Otherwise, you, and I don't mean to be a journalist necessarily, I mean, but you have to.
You have to train your kids, by the way. I mean, when my kids were little, I trained them to see sexism. So we'd watch, a TV show together, and I would literally pause it and say, "Did you hear what that character just said? Would he have said that to a boy?" And I would literally train my kids to call out sexism everywhere, maybe to an extreme. And the same thing is with anti-Semitism now. You have to train your kids to hear bias because otherwise they're going to be one of the brainwashed.
I have
So it's really, yeah.
I just shared this one story with Samantha. So in the 70s, I was a journalist at a Jewish newspaper, but I was also teaching news writing and copy editing courses that were separate courses at Temple University Center Cindy in Philadelphia. And I collected clips meaning like articles,
Yeah, of course.
of article after article after article of sexism. But here's the interesting thing. I had to teach these college students how to recognize it, which is, by the way, a whole nother, can't do it in this show, but lots of times Evelyn and I have shows in which we try and help people recognize what is anti-Semitism. But the weirdest thing was that the women too had those attitudes and that I had to change both the attitudes in the women and men before they could recognize the sexism. So it's not a simple process, but we have to do
No,
it.
and it has to start young. I mean, the younger you start, the better. It's never too early to show your kids and teach them what to recognize because I think so often, especially with young people, you hear parents, it's a parenting style where they say, because I said so, or listen to your teacher. And I think it's so important to actually learn to question. And that's the essence of Judaism is to question. So it makes sense.
Okay, I just can't help myself adding this one thing. So when my two daughters, my husband and I were back in Philadelphia with our two daughters, we went to visit the Jewish exponent where I had worked years before. And one of the reporters still there told my daughters, your mother got women to die in their own names. And I had totally forgotten that women used when in obituaries, it would be Mrs. John Jones, and then it would be Nay, meaning their maiden name, and their first name would never be shown. And I had
Received a
totally
lot of
forgotten.
wedding invitations like that, and and I'm like,
Yeah,
what happened
okay.
here?
I still cringe at that. But my point is, I'd forgotten that I had campaigned. So, that sounds like such a little thing.
No.
But those are the kinds of things that if we are aware of it, now I'm talking back to anti-Semitism, but saying,
Yeah,
be aware of it. Say something
exactly.
nicely. See if you can educate people. Oh, do you realize that we're not even naming the woman? Blah, blah.
And
So
also, Phyllis, if we could clone you, and if there were people like you who had done this their whole lives, we would have many fewer problems. I mean, part of it is that there's so few people speaking out like you do.
I know I try and get people to, I mean, the most important course I ever took was assertiveness training in Philadelphia, learning how to be assertive and not aggressive, learning how to win, not to respond because people just hook at it and keep saying nasty things back. It's a really important skill I wish every Jewish person and non-Jewish person would learn so that you can have a conversation which you can hopefully, I could go on and on. I could tell you about when we got to Fort Knox, Kentucky in the spring of 1970. My husband was an ROTC officer, you know, to be a Jew at that time in the military. Not that Jews have, and I always make a point of this, Jews today still serve in the American military. They serve in the percentage that we are in the population. But because we're very small in the population, people can serve their whole military career without knowing a Jew. So that was an interesting experience in the spring of 1970. But I've always looked at it as a chance to, show I don't have horns, show, be explain instead of pretending it's not important. It is important.
Yeah,
And we need to be able to speak up. So Samantha, I think you're wonderful. I just think what you're doing is terrific. I doubt that Amazon will be encouraged, or perhaps they finally allowed a employee resource group. It's not going to make me stop ordering from Amazon, I have to admit,
I
because
know we're all too attached. There's not a good alternative. Yeah,
right. But I I do think that where we can make a difference, we should.
agree. And thank you for all that you do, Phyllis. I really appreciate you.
And thank our listeners for listening. For those of you who want to know more about Evelyn and myself and our projects, you can go to Never Again Is Now podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as we say at the end of every episode, please speak up against anti Semitism and all hate.